So, a very good evening and welcome along to the UlsterWhiskey.com's Whiskey Live with myself, Justin McCartney, and the expert, the guru himself, Marty McAuley. And he's standing by for us there. There we are. You're there, Marty, this evening. And what have we got lined up tonight then?
I want to talk tonight about the old distilleries and the new. So we all know that there's Ireland has a huge history of whiskey, but I've touched on it before about not many people know just how close it came to disappearing. But some of the whiskies that have managed to survive the duration, and other ones that are, I call them the Lazarus brands. You know, they've been raised from the dead. You know.
Have they really risen from the dead, or is it just a case of slapping a label on it and that's it?
How can I answer this delicately, Justin? Some of them is very much a slap a label on, and other ones it's a bit more thought and a bit more care and a bit more attention and homage to the heritage of the place. But some of them very much it's a slap on label job, you know.
Okay, well, we'll find out more. So what's first tonight then?
Well, what I want to do is I want to show you this wonderful book. If you are a whiskey nerd, this is basically your Bible for information about whiskey in the late 19th century. Okay, this is Alfred Bernhard's book on the distilleries of the United Kingdom. So this was Great Britain and Ireland at the time, obviously. And on the back, you see the man himself. What he did was he went around the various distilleries in the UK and wrote down what they did. You know, what they were producing, where they were located, how he got to them. So it was kind of a diary based on the distilleries. So they were published sort of weekly, and then this was all amalgamated into this wonderful book. Now, if we go to the Ireland pages, so when he came over to Ireland, he lists all of the distilleries that he visited, and he talks about them in really great detail, and it's very well written. There's lots of little drawings, sort of etchings of the distilleries. He goes through a nice history of the places, and it's a real reference point. Now, the reason I want to start with this is some of the names of these distilleries disappeared. Now they have made a comeback. So when he's going through this, he lists, for example, the Royal Irish Distillery, Bow Street, Phoenix Park Distillery, Tullamore. Some of these names obviously are familiar today to whiskey aficionados. But lots of them have disappeared, but you will find out about them again. They are coming back. So he lists 20
Is that book still in print, Marty? Is it? No.
Very much so. It's £40 to buy. But well worth it. You could spend hours, and especially if you're going to Scotland or going to a distillery that is one of the new ones is reappearing, because you can get a bit of a comparison and a bit of an idea of what they were like and what they are like now. So a fantastic read. So he goes to the 28 distilleries in Ireland, except for one. So typical East Belfast. He goes to all of the rest of them get pages, except for the Avonhill Distillery in Belfast. Okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Where he goes, this distillery is about half a mile from the previous chapter. The proprietor stands conspicuous as being unwilling to allow an inspection of his works, for what reason we are unable to explain. So, typical East Belfast. Thran, I think, is the word we use.
Secretive.
Yeah, but his son then goes on to explain, we learned from his son that it was built in 1882 and had an annual output of 850,000 gallons. It was a big operation. So it was. So I thought that I quite like the fact that he went to every other distillery in the UK, brings him in and shows him everything and talks about the history of the place. And in East Belfast, he said no.
You gotta love it. You gotta love it. A bit like Thackeray, he went everywhere except Carrickfergus in his tour of Ireland, which is a bit. How do you miss Carrickfergus Castle? At least we know. At least we know the Alfred didn't ghostwrite it.
No, he very much wrote it himself. And as I say, all the distilleries, the way he writes the stuff is really, really engaging, really nice. He's obviously an accomplished writer, so it's well worth. If you're a bit of a whiskey nerd, really buy that book. It's well worth doing. But I want to go back a little bit to then jump forward to his time and then come up to the modern time. So
okay,
I know Chris joined it when he came here. As I say, he had 28 distilleries to visit, but there was lots of different. Well, it was normally to do with tax, which meant some of the distilleries appeared and disappeared and so on and so forth. So prior to 1600, there would have been countless little distilleries up and down the country. There would have been, up and down the island of Ireland, there would have been thousands of them. Pretty much the farmer, the man would have went out and farmed the field, and the wife would have essentially stayed at home, looked after the home, and done the brewing, and also did distilling. They did this at home as well. So it would have been very, very common for pretty much every house. But it may have been that some pubs and inns and stuff, they had their own distilleries again. And really it was just a common household practice. Jumping forward a little bit, in and around, well, I suppose the start of the 17th century, we know Bushmills has on its label these days 1608. But what happened was, in 1608, what happened was the local bigwig, so Sir Arthur Chichester in Belfast, was granted the right to grant patents to people who owned townlands, essentially. So he granted a patent to a man called Thomas Phillips, who this was the first whiskey patent in the world, and that was granted in April 1608. So this was a way of having taxation, generating tax, because once you get a license, you have to pay for it. So basically, we're granted monopolies. When this was granted, there was also a man called Sexton down in Leinster. He was granted a patent. There was a few other people as well were granted patents in and around this time. Now, the old Bushmills distillery as a company wasn't registered, and I keep having to look down because I've got some dates down because my dates always get a bit mangled.
You're just looking down at me because I'm up here looking up at you like that. There, you see.
I see. No, in 1784 was when old Bushmills was registered as a company. So it is extremely old, but it's not actually as old a company as, if I can just see it here, as Kilbeggan. The Kilbeggan company was registered in 1757. Okay. Now, if you ever get a chance to go to Locke's Distillery down in Kilbeggan, it's a wonderful. It's a picture postcard distillery. It's absolutely beautiful. It's all been restored and back in business again. So we'll talk a bit about this later on. So you have also got a man called Peter Rowe buys a brewery, but I think he bought a brewery originally and then converted it to a distillery. So now you have the Rowe name, and he's a distiller in Dublin. So these guys are now companies. These are businesses that have been set up as businesses, not your pub that happens to do a little bit of distilling on the side and a bit of brewing on the side. These are dedicated companies, but they would have been, certainly in terms of today. Tiny. They'd have been tiny little things. Probably a couple of 100-gallon stills, so they wouldn't have been very, very big. What they would have been producing, we wouldn't recognise as whiskey today.
Was size an indication that they were going to survive, or did some of the ones with low volumes survive and some of the ones with big volumes disappear?
Well, what happened was in 1779, there was a law brought in that taxed the capacity of the still. Not actually what you produced, but the capacity of the still.
Okay.
If you could make bigger volumes, you had to pay more tax. Even though you weren't producing it, you had to pay more tax. So what happened was they had to basically process a lot of volume, which meant an inferior quality, and there wasn't as much time and care taken about it. It also favoured the bigger distilleries, okay? Because if you could make more, you can pay more tax and so on and so forth. That's just the way of the world. Now, when that law was brought in, there was 1,228 distilleries registered in Ireland. So 1,228 distilleries in 1779. Literally, a year later, it was down to 246. The small ones there's no way they could produce enough. So you still had 246. These would have been a bigger capacity, but again, in terms of what we have today, they would still have been tiny. By 1822, Ireland was down to 40 legitimate stills, distilleries. But a man he's instrumental in the whole whiskey story is a man called Aeneas Coffey, who created the column still. Talked about those one time before, the rather tall, continuous process still.
Yeah.
Well, he estimated there was about 800 illegal ones. So you can kind of gauge that people were still drinking huge volumes, but there was only 40 actual properly registered distilleries. Okay.
Okay.
So, with that in mind, again, there was another law change. These laws kept changing, and depending on the laws that were enacted, the number of distilleries either rapidly increased or decreased. By 1835, there was 93 distilleries back in action. So again, you kind of get this, depending on the law, boom, up. Probably some of these distilleries were operational illegally, and whenever the law changed, they were.
So was there amalgamation and splitting and selling and re-establishing brands even back then?
There would have been, but brands at the time they wouldn't have necessarily been what we would classify as a brand today. You have the sort of start of it in and around the start of the 19th century. Certainly names like Jameson and stuff were trying to establish their reputation because there was counterfeiting going on. People were passing stuff off. They would have been made illegally and passed off as Jameson or Bushmills. So they were trying to establish the brands. That's what goes on. I mean, we know that this kind of thing happens quite regularly. 1823, the largest pot still in Ireland was 750 gallons, right? By 1825, Middleton had one that was 31,500 gallons. So a total change. That's a comparable size to what we have today. That's the increase is just enormous. Okay. Now, by this stage, you started to have some of the names that we recognise today. Obviously, Bushmills, Kilbeggan, but you also had the likes of Powers and Jameson coming into play at that time. So these were established names that we're familiar with today. Okay.
Okay.
Now, throughout the 19th century, there was lots of different changes. There was different changes in taste and what people liked. Irish whiskey reigned supreme. it was really what people preferred, like that nice lighter flavor, triple distilled. It was very approachable, very nice. It wasn't as heavy and as oily and as medicinal as a lot of the Scottish whiskies. So it really was the big thing. You also had the start of blenders and bonding houses. People who would have bought in whiskey, blended it, stored it, and aged it themselves, and then sent it out as a product of their own. They don't have their own distillery, but they have their own brand. And for that, I'm kind of thinking of the likes of J.J. Corey.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Kirker and Greer. I talked about them last week. You had these brands that were making up their own style of whiskey. So yeah, Kirker and Greer. You see the advert. These were big outfits, So again, they had these brands. Now, so what happened?
But if they didn't have their own distillery, how did the brands feel about them existing then? Were they supplying them with the raw material, or
Absolutely.
was it? Yeah,
they were buying in whiskey from all over. Now, Kirk and Greer, I just seen the advert you have up there. Kirk and Greer did end up running a distillery. They set up their own distilleries. But what I mean is they would have bought stock from other distilleries. Everybody does this even today. I mean, most companies won't use just one single product in their entire range. I mean, that wouldn't really be beneficial. So, I mean, today, for example, we have the supermarket own brand stuff that is bought, that they buy from different distilleries, license, label it as something else and sell it. I mean, this has been going on for a long, long time. So it's a perfectly legitimate way of doing business. Now, through the 19th century, you had lots of really good a good time really for Irish whiskey. Once you start getting towards the 1900s, this is when it all starts going wrong. And it starts going wrong on basically a perfect storm. Everything that possibly could go wrong essentially went wrong. You had lots of people think it was prohibition in the States that really put the nail in the coffin.
Okay, yeah.
It wasn't, okay? One of the big things was the invention of the column still, the one that Aeneas Coffee produced.
So can I put this on screen? This is one of these wee small time outfits that they would have had. That's the sort of small time outfits, and they went from that, and then they went to big ones like this here. That's what they ended up with, massive ones like that there. That's Bandon, I think, and that's basically what happened. They went from small to big, and that's where it sort of went pear-shaped for them.
Well, everything was going great until you had the column still came in, and lots of the Irish producers kind of thought it's not really whiskey because it wasn't particularly flavoursome. In case you're wondering what I'm doing, I am dispensing into a glass. Last week I got told off even from a woman from Derry about drinking out of a tin. So okay.
That was a topic of conversation all week, Marty, by the way.
I know. Right. Belfast Ale. I quite like this. This is really nice. The White War Brewing Company. Belfast Black Stout is really good and really good.
Home Bargains have got some great offers on the beer, by the way, in Larne. 79p a bottle.
I must get a rundown. Anyway, where was it? Oh, yes. So into the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century.
Before we get to the 20th century, can we run through some of the things tonight, because it's really massively busy tonight. I know you can't necessarily always see these.
No.
If you want to get in touch with the show, always go to our Facebook page, Irish Whiskey Review /live, and you can comment and share from there, and then we can see them. Right. So I'm going to run through some of these tonight. I'm going to say hi to some people. Remember, if your name comes up on the screen, give us a wave. We can see you. We can see you in your nightie, Brona. There you go. How are you, Brona? There you go. Brona's there. Hello, Philip, as well. Good evening to you. And Trevor is watching again tonight in Fermanagh. Yeah, there you go. I'm heading down to Canoe the River Blackwater later on this month, so I'm looking forward to that. Mark Kerr has been saying, looking forward to another evening of educational crack. I tell you what, normally I do this about 10 minutes in, but I was that engrossed in what you were saying tonight, Marty, myself, that it was 20 minutes before I realized the time. Mark Kerr saying, like Green Spot, etc. Like Green Spot. So we'll come back to that for him later on. What was he referring to there with the?
He's referring to the this idea of buying in your product, your thing. So stuff was brought in by a blending house, Mitchell's. It was labelled as a. The terms green spot, yellow spot, and red spot are there's three brands, and that refers to the marks that they used to put on the barrels. The guy who decided what was going into what put the marks on it. Now seen as a quality product, and a bottle of red spot, which would be the higher end one, it's about £120 a bottle, there or thereabouts, maybe a wee bit less. So. That Mark's 100% right. That's what I mean when I say about these blenders and bonders and stuff. So.
And Bert was saying some knowledge there, Marty. Yes, thanks for that, guys. And we've got a couple of mentions. Sean O'Neill saying hi as well. And to get us back on track and into the 20th century, Nick Ryan says silent spirit. That is. Spirit from column stills was known as that back then. Why? Because the old stills bubbled and churned, whereas this just went. No,
it was really because it was called the sort of silent spirit because it was seen as being really an inferior product, and in some ways it is. It doesn't take on the same flavour, and it was put in. It was blended. I talked about blended whiskey. Yeah, like Bushmills is a blend where they use some malt and really stuff from pot stills, and then water it down, if you like, with silent spirit. So it's not really influencing the flavour. It was seen as a very inferior product. So what happened was lots of the Scottish brands started to use it, because they had the big, heavy, peated, phenolic spirit that if you watered it down with the silent spirit, with grain whiskey, it could still be flavoursome. It actually was probably more palatable to the average punter than the single malt as we would know it now. Irish whiskey, they didn't tend to adopt it. They thought it wasn't actually whiskey. They argued that it wasn't whiskey, and actually there was a Royal Commission set up in 1908 to actually determine whether it was whiskey or not. When the Royal Commission came back, they said it was. And this was a bit of a hammer blow to the Irish whiskey market. Okay?
I bet you there was probably a lot of old retired judges and brigadiers wanting to volunteer to be on that committee.
Hands up. Can I get on that, Pango? Yes, please. So this was a bit of a blow. There was some Irish whiskey distilleries who had adopted the column still quite quickly. I'm thinking particularly of Dunville's on the Grosvenor Road. That was their stock and trade. They used to export huge amounts of whiskey to Scotland. But that was in 1908. Now, you have to remember, at this point, there was a lot of whiskey was sold straight from the still. It wasn't aged at all. It was still called whiskey. We wouldn't call it whiskey today, but it was basically the naked spirit. So it was run off straight off the still, bottled, and then people could do what they wanted with it when they had it. So it was unaged spirit. Okay. First World War breaks out, 1914, and Lloyd George is teetotal. He's Prime Minister at the time. He's teetotal and is very much a prohibitionist. Now, this temperance movement and stuff had really started to take hold worldwide. Okay, Lloyd George in 1915 brings in an act called the Aged Spirits Act, which we still use today as a reference point in some ways, where whiskey has to be aged a minimum of 3 years in a cask. Now, prior to that, it could be sold straight off the still. Now it has to be aged for 3 years. You can understand where that's an economic hammer blow to the distilleries. You now have lots and lots of stock that you cannot sell. Okay, so you have thousands of barrels that you can't sell for 3 years. So that was a blow. The Royal Commission for Irish, the Royal Commission saying that grain whiskey was a first blow. Then came the Aged Spirits Act. Then in the 1920s, you had the Volstead Act in America. So you had prohibition, which was, in many ways, Irish whiskey at that point was still seen as the quality product. So when something's a quality product, what happens? That's what the bootleggers were copying. They were selling off basically gut rot whiskey as Irish whiskey. So
that harms the brand, but Marty, surely
that annihilates the brand, because people don't know if they're going to get Bushmills or something that's brewed in a milk churn on a farm somewhere.
Right.
So the other thing was, well, there's a couple of different things for the Scotch industry. If you buy a bottle of Lefroy, now Lefroy is really, really heavily peated and medicinal. Okay, medicinal is a key word here too. If you buy a bottle of Lefroy and put 2 teaspoonfuls of Lefroy into this will start to taste like Lefroy. Okay. So what they were able to do, the bootleggers, they bought basically watered down industrial alcohol, but 1 barrel of Lefroy goes a very, very long way. So suddenly these people are starting to get a taste for that Scottish whiskey taste. Okay, so you can see where that starts to come in, and they go, actually, that's not bad, but I quite like that. The other thing was, alcohol wasn't totally banned in the US during the Prohibition era. You could get a prescription from the doctor to allow you to buy whiskey because it was seen as a medicine. Now, I wish the NHS had this, but what you could do is you could go and get a prescription and go and get a bottle of whiskey. So, Irish whiskey wasn't necessarily seen as being that beneficial medicinally when you had these other sort of heavy chemical tastes to them. So that sort of smoky, peated thing started to come through then as well. So people during Prohibition actually could get their hands on some alcohol. Famously, Winston Churchill was got a $4 prescription, as it was known when he was there. So yeah, he wasn't going to go without. So as I say, you had this, that happened. Then when Prohibition came back, when the whiskey sort of industry started to come back again, and in some ways during the 1920s, you have to remember Ireland had completely changed. You had partition, and that caused all manner of ructions. One, De Valera decided to go on a trade war with the UK and at the time the Empire, which was a third of the globe. So, you cut off all these international markets. De Valera really wanted to focus on the domestic market. So when it came to the Second World War, Churchill said that the barley grown for malt had to keep going because it was seen as being a massive moneymaker for the UK, for the war effort. So they were exporting whiskey all the way across to the US, and it was a great moneymaker. De Valera, on the other hand, thought he could make more money on the domestic market. So what he did was he cut exports. So just at the time when they probably could have had a bit more of an impact by selling in the US, he cut the market to it. So they were developing a taste for Scotch whiskey. So there's a whole, it just was a perfect storm, and all of these big whiskey distilleries, pretty much all of them disappeared. Okay, so the ones that Alfred Bernhard went and seen. Now you skip along until the 1970s. You skip along to the 1970s, and Irish whiskey's in absolute crisis. It's in total disarray. The sales are plummeted. People are now drinking Smirnoff and this kind of stuff. You know, they're drinking all that white spirits, as it's known. Now the distilleries that were in Dublin, and I'm talking about Bow Street and stuff, they get together and say, right, we can't survive as independent businesses. We need to form Irish distillers. Now there's an awful lot more complexity to all of this. What they do is they decide to amalgamate and move to Middleton, down in Cork, or down near Cork. So they spend a huge amount of money. Off the top of my head, something tells me it was £9 million at the time, building a brand new distillery. Middleton had a distillery, small affair. This was huge. But all of these brands amalgamated. So you had Powers and let's see off the top of my head. So you had Powers and Jameson and the likes of Redbreast and stuff. All of this all under one umbrella and made in Middleton. Up here, you had Bushmills and Coleraine. Coleraine stopped producing. They became a bottling plant that was bought over by Bushmills. All of the other distilleries kind of disappeared. To give you an idea of some of the scale of the whiskey stocks that these guys had, when the distilleries closed down in Derry, the Watts distilleries down in Derry, they closed down in the 1920s. I think it was 1925. They had enough stock that they were still selling whiskey for blending right up until the 1960s. So 40 years worth of stock, because people just weren't drinking it, and they were able to sell it to blenders. So It gives you a scale of just how big a fall from grace this was. 1915, just a quick aside, 1915, the Bogside Distillery, the Watts Bogside Distillery, had a whiskey fire. Pretty much all the distilleries caught fire at one point. They started breaking the casks, and the whiskey started flowing down the street. So loads and loads of people went out and just started filling buckets and buckets and buckets of the stuff and taking it home with them. So
sounds about right. Sounds about right.
I imagine there were probably people still drinking that up until the 1960s. There was that much of it, but so it's just this total devastation of the whole industry. Tullamore Dew, for example, down in Tullamore, obviously, they stopped producing, but they started making Irish mist, that sort of Irish whiskey liqueur. Now, what happened was they stopped distilling, but they still had enough stock to keep going for approximately 10 years. But as the whiskey started to run out, they made a deal with Powers for them to supply the whiskey. Basically, they were taken over. Powers got the brand, but the dailies, they went on to the board and things. So the distillery just was left to rot. Okay, it never reopened. They didn't have to reopen it because they didn't need to produce the whiskey for it, and so it kind of disappeared. The brand didn't really disappear, but the distillery did. Now, 1980s.
Hold on before we jump forward. You take a drink and I'll give some other people a mention here. Julie Mason's tuned in tonight. Evening, Julie. Really enjoying the history, Marty. Such a great amount of knowledge and information. Yes, it really is superb. I'm living and learning all the time here. Andreas is saying hello. Guten Abend, Andreas. Guten Abend. And Sean O'Neill is saying spots were put on the barrels because lots of the workers couldn't read or write, hence putting different colors in the barrels instead of writing on them. One of the living relatives of the founders of Mitch's Son said this a few weeks ago in the interview. I must watch that. Where's that interview? Did you see that interview, Marty? No, that sounds interesting, that one.
That interview. There's a lot. I imagine it's probably there'll be a link to it on the Irish Whiskey Facebook page, I would think. I haven't seen it.
Probably would be. But what happens if you're colorblind? That's what I want to know. What happens if you're colorblind? And Mark Kerr's joined the show. Strangely, just poured a glass of Tullamore Dew. So good. Drink whiskey. There you go. So we're jumping forward to a more contemporary period now, Marty, because we're 36 minutes in. Time is flying tonight.
Right, I'll do this quickly. In comes a fantastic man called John Teeling, or Dr. John Teeling, as he is known. He buys the Cooley Distillery. Now, the Cooley Distillery was a potato industrial alcohol plant. He decided that Irish whiskey had a future, and he actually bought the stills from the old Cumber Distillery. Okay? What happened was, it had shut down in the 1950s. The Ben Nevis Distillery in Scotland over in Fort William had bought the stills and transplanted them over there. He then found out that this is where they were, so he bought them and then brought them back to County Louth. Okay? So, he started to produce whiskey. Now, he was the first guy to really twig we can get some traction and sort of fake heritage, if you like, by buying old-time whiskey brands, the likes of Tyrconnell. Now, if you can just see that, okay, on this bottle, it says 1762. And the Andrew A. Watt Distillery, the Andrew Watt Distillery, they had two of them in Derry. So this says at the bottom of it, County Louth. It's not really true. But this harks back to a whiskey that was quite famous at a time in the US. You could still get old advertising hoardings and stuff from the likes of Yankee Stadium and stuff with this. So he's an extremely clever man. I've met him a few times. He's an absolute gentleman, a lovely guy. And so he bought this. So he had literally just taken over a distillery. He had an extremely hard time. At one point, he had one weekend to try and find £5.5 million. Now, I've had 45 years and I can't find £5.5 million. But being as persuasive as he is, he didn't get 5.5. He got enough to sort of keep the wolves from the door, and he managed to save it. He also then bought the old Loch Distillery, or took over the Kilbeggan brand, and it brought this kind of thing back. So he bought into this sort of fake heritage, and some of them were called Cooley clones. As in, I mean, this is one here in a showing. Okay, it's distilled, bottled, and matured, bottled in Ireland by Andrew A. Watt and Co. Cooley, County Louth. Andrew Watt doesn't.
No, one's up here and the other's down there, isn't it? Something like that. They're the other side of Ulster.
Yes. Now I haven't opened this because this is actually now a wee bit of a collectible. It was dead cheap, and now they discontinued it. It's actually really nice. I may open it at some point. I've already opened a few bottles of it, but I'll keep in that one. So, what has happened since? At the start of this, you showed the map of the current. Well, it's not actually current because there's a little bit more to add to it. Yeah, on this now you have 49 distilleries. What you're seeing is some names starting to reappear that were long dead. And I'm thinking along the lines of the Roe & Co. George Roe, huge distillery it was down near Guinness. Roe and Guinness used to have a bit of a rivalry. If you go to St Patrick's Cathedral, you'll see Benjamin Guinness, the statue of him outside it. He paid for the renovation for St Patrick's. The Roe family paid for the renovations of Christchurch Cathedral. So it was this sort of rivalry between the two. Diageo, who own the Roe & Co brand, have now spent millions on a new distillery and visitor centre. So they have bought that. You have the likes of, obviously, the Dunville's brands. Now, Dunville's, I've talked about them a few times. Dunville's have really invested a lot of time and effort in this. They take it really seriously. By that, I mean they sponsor Distillery Football Club, and they sent a lady across to find all the old adverts and stuff in newspapers in the US and stuff. So they've really bought into the whole thing and really, really good. Some of the brands that have continued through, and I'm thinking about the likes of Crested 10. It's now branded as Crested. This is actually an old bottle from the 70s, which was distilled in Bow Street.
Okay.
Bow Street has reopened as a visitors centre. They tell you that there's whiskey there, but it's kept in the cellars as such. They don't really have a distillery there. They just have a warehouse essentially. But they get to say that they're aging whiskey in Dublin. So it's the first aged whiskey in Dublin for a while. Kilbeggan similarly. This is actually made in Kilbeggan. For a long time, they distilled a tiny little amount. It was all brought down from Cooley. They really just wanted to have the brand. So these sort of lasted. Again, Bushmills, obviously. This is an interesting one. Coleraine. Okay. It says on the back of it, product of Middleton Distillery, County Cork.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah. This would have been nothing like the original Coleraine whiskey. Coleraine whiskey was pot still. It was supposedly the best in Ireland. It was the whiskey of the House of Commons, etc., etc. You'll see that this isn't open. Okay, there's a reason for that. I've tasted it before, so moving quickly on. Now you've started to see some of the, as I say, JJ Corey coming back. I sent you a picture because I don't actually have a bottle of it yet, of the McConnells.
Yep, we have it there. Yep.
A Belfast brand doing what the Belfast brand did. They buy in the whiskey, they make it up and sell it the type that they want. Again, harking back to the heritage, the label, etc., etc. So you've got all these. I mean, the likes of Jameson lasted the course, kept on. This very wonderful little product, again with the wee Burt Reynolds medallion on it. Matt Darcy, again, this is another one that they're investing a lot of time and effort doing the research to buy into the story, to get the heritage, to get the ethos of the company, and so on and so forth. So this is really a key part of their marketing and branding and history and so on and so forth. And it's to their credit, the likes of the Inishowen one, where it's, as you said earlier on, are there some of them just slapping a label on top of it? I have to say a lot of the Cooley stuff kind of has that feel to it. The other stuff, the Matt Darcy and the Dunville's one, there's much more of a, we're buying into this heritage.
Sean O'Neill says a very witty thing there. He says stories and sips. I mean, it's that's almost it is. It's a never let the truth get in the good way of a good story. You know what I mean?
Oh no, stories and sips. Stories and sips is a podcast. So that yes, that's it's a podcast, but obviously you get it on the usual podcast thing. So that's where the interview must have been for
That's what he's talking about, the interview earlier on that went into what when was he talking about? We get that many messages a night. It's very hard to stay on top of it without a producer telling me in my ear. All I'm doing is listening to the show in my ear, by the way. So I don't have. There's no team behind us, by the way.
There's not very much prep work done on this either. I've been 7 dates right now, nothing to hate about. But no, I'll be honest with you. You see the Rowan Co one. This annoyed me a little bit because this is Diageo, who bought. And if you go down now to the visitor centre, it doesn't invest a huge amount of money. But it kind of feels a little bit like they have slapped it on. The bottle doesn't look anything like what the bottle would have looked like. There's not that much invested in the heritage. And to me, if you're a company the size of Diageo and doing that, it's a little bit lazy, if I'm honest. They would have obviously the money, the resources, and experience to come up with new stuff and to really push it and pump it and do new and interesting stuff. To me, it doesn't sit particularly well with me, but who am I to argue with the mighty Guinness for Diageo? You know?
Well, a lot of people are saying very complimentary things about the man in County Louth in Irish whiskey, smart and determined. That's what it takes. Cooley did some fantastic whiskies. There you go.
Yeah. Man's Irish whiskey, if I'm totally honest. I think lots of people are riding on the coattails of Dr. John. I take my hat off to him. As I say, I think he made a lot of the key decisions to get Irish whiskey back onto its feet. And
I think Barry does the podcast. He's saying my stories and Sip's ears are burning.
Ears are burning.
Well, listen, there's nothing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about at all. There you go. So let me see what else are people saying tonight. Frank Hearn is saying, just found out why I love Teelings. It's the Cumber Stills. Frank Hearn, I think, is in County Down, but he lives in Scotland. Is he? I'm just looking at the screen. Yes, that's what they're saying. Yes.
The Cumber Stills went into the Cooley Distillery. Teelings bought up part of the deal when they sold the Cooley Distillery. Was they kept a fair amount of the stock. So some of the earlier Teelings stuff, the newer stuff, Frank, it's made in Dublin, my friend, and quite good at it too. Very good at it.
And we're also getting messages in. Michael Matthews saying is looking forward to Belfast Whiskey Week. Waterford launched 2 new offerings today at 1:00. You couldn't buy a bottle by 2:00. Whiskey is big business with a lot of new followers. Yes, we have a lot of followers. Yes, not just whiskey. We have a lot of followers as well. If you'd like to be one of our followers, make sure you go on our ulsterwhiskey.com page. You can also go to the newsletter and sign up for it as well. So it's worth doing as well. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, it is very, very good indeed. This is how you get to the newsletter. You click this link, you'll see it in the feed appearing very, very shortly beneath the comments, and that is how you sign up. So quite a few people signed up for that already. It does look like gobbledygook, but if you copy and paste it into the search bar at the top of the screen, it'll take you through there. Just do the GDPR, click yes, and then send your name. And it's as simple as that. Send your email address, and that's it. Now, we've got about 10 or 12 minutes left tonight. Where do we have to go now, Marty?
Well, I want to just say about the map that was on there. If you go back to our good friend, Alfred Bernhard, some of the old distilleries are now starting to appear. Some of them don't appear on that map, actually, but they are now registered as distilleries. You're going to start seeing probably a bit more of these harking back. And what you can do is, if you get this book and look through the stuff and see what the heritage, you can check to see how authentic they're being as such. I would recommend that book, even if you're not necessarily a whiskey fan, even just as a sort of travel guide and looking around. It does make for superb reading. It's a wonderful document, but wonderful tome.
I can see you walking around with that book, Marty, and being like what Michael Portillo is to trains. You could be to whiskey.
Yes. Yeah. They have to wear one of those salmon pink coats. No.
I thought you already had one of them for tour guiding. Do you not? No.
I keep that for private occasions.
So listen, we've got 10 minutes left. If you want to get in touch with the show, just comment, like, and share, hit send. It'll appear, especially if you're watching on the main feed at Irish Whiskey Review on Facebook or ulstrawhiskey.com. You can click through and find us that way as well on Tinternet. Now, a lot of these new ones are appearing. We still have to do them, don't we, in the final 10 minutes? Yeah.
What I'm saying is about these new distilleries that are sort of harking back, and I'm talking in some cases about the likes of the Tullamore Dew. This is now owned by Grant's, the big Scottish whiskey distillery or whiskey brand, and they have pumped €30 million into the new experience centre down there. It's beautiful. It's really, really good. There's some nice little touches to it. Down by the river, there's new jobs in it. And all of this matters. It's all right talking about the history of stuff, but if you want to talk about the future, there has to be money invested in this.
Mm-hmm.
And people are investing a lot in it. This Crested 10 has been rebranded as Crested. This bottle, actually, what I'm drinking here now is 50 years old. Okay. If I'm totally honest, it's probably as better today than it is in this. But you have all these new brands, new exciting brands, new developments, but they are kind of harking back to the past. Some ways it's very good, some ways it's probably not fantastic in some ways. But you do have a history and a heritage. Pretty much every area of Ireland has that history and heritage. And it's played such a huge part in the history and the shaping and everything of this wonderful place that I live in, that it is worth checking out. And whiskey is a very fun way of doing it, It's better than Michael Portillo.
We've got some really great comments coming in here tonight. Peter McCabe says, excellent chat, Marty, and I don't even like whiskey. I think he just hasn't found the whiskey for him yet.
This is it. I guarantee you, Peter, I could get you a whiskey that you would like. And if you don't like it, I will. So we can find a compromise.
Now, we've got some questions tonight, Marty. Did we have one earlier we had to go back to? Did we answer that one? Did we? I think we did. We're being asked, what do you think of Slane?
I like it. I liked it more. The first time I ever tasted it was at the Belfast Whisky Social. I thought it was super, but that was about 5 whiskies in. It's all right. Yeah, it's okay. But again, it's the entry level. It's the one that they have out is basically their entry level. You can't necessarily judge a brand by what they first bring out. It's a bit. Once the distilleries getting the mature stock and stuff, like the Waterford Distillery has released their stuff this week, you'll have an indication of what they're going to be like.
Did you manage to get a bottle of that, Marty, of Waterford? No,
it didn't. But I may be able to get a bottle. Shall we say? I haven't got one.
Okay. Frank Hearn's also staying. He's staying. Just cracked open a 50-year-old. What one was that we were talking about earlier? That a 50-year-old was it that?
But this isn't a 50. This bottle was done in the Bow Street Distillery in Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's not a 50-year-old whiskey as by an age statement.
Mm-hmm.
Age is how long it's in the barrel. But this whiskey is the actual liquid in this was distilled at the very latest in the 1970s. So it's probably the liquid in it is 50 years old.
And I must admit, people that know each other but only come across each other, Michael Mashers is saying, watch out, Dave Cummings is in the house because they can see who else is watching. Another legend of whiskey when he's not breeding cattle. And then, Marty, the response comes back, Michael, all right, lad, just up from the farm. All the cattle are good. There you go.
That's Dave all the way down and all the way down in Dingle. And yes, they're one of the new brands who set up their own brand, decided to go with their own branding, their own tradition, start from scratch as such. And a round of applause to them. They do wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff. Beautiful place. Get down, go and visit them. It's fantastic.
I used to have to rescue cars from the big long beach down there, and I used to have friendly farmers down there that used to drag Mercedes Benz that had driven on the beach out of the tide just before all the other got washed. Now, Connor Farrell is saying Slane is still a source spirit. They still have to age their own product.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. It's a source spirit. There's lots of these new brands, as I say, are buying in aged stock, and it's coming from a very shallow pool. There just isn't massively aged stock. So again, it's a nice, approachable, easy enough whiskey, but you don't necessarily judge what they're going to be doing by what they've done already. So they could be in a few years' time bringing out the best whiskey in the world, but they haven't. It's not ready yet. So that's.
And Dave's coming back with, he says, would have loved it if Jameson had put a microbrewery distillery in Bow Street. Would have been something to behold. Yes, it probably would have been. There's the old Bow Street there in Dublin. I think they would get cross Dublin Corporation if you tried to put a distillery of any sort where they didn't want it put, Marty. Planning permission quite tough for these micro distilleries?
Probably not as much as you would think. They're not very polluting. They don't have to be very big. I mean, the Dengle Distillery is basically a large cattle shed. It's not a big. It's not. I'm not saying. I don't want to sound derogatory about the whole thing, but it's a very small operation. I would surprise how small it is.
Most industrial units are just the same building technique as a cattle shed, with the offices in it and a bit more services. Michael Matthews is agreeing. He's saying, "What a great idea! I think these microbreweries, micro distilleries are a wonderful idea." And I'm getting cramp in my leg, by the way, just in case why you wonder why I'm moving. Never sit still for 45 minutes. That's the rule. And Dave Cummings is saying, I think they missed a trick when they renovated there a few years back. Imagine Crested being back in Bow Street. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Dave has a very good point. Irish distillers, who essentially Jameson and so on, put the micro distillery in Middleton and did all their new experimental stuff. The Method and Madness is a new brand from Irish distillers, and I don't necessarily see why they couldn't have put it in Bow Street. It would probably have been a very, very good idea, but commercial reasons, I suppose, or logistics, who knows.
So we'll wrap it up, Marty. What do you think the future holds then?
The future's bright. That map is missing a new announcement of another distillery coming. Apparently, they're bringing a distillery to Glenarm. It was announced last week. They're going to build a distillery, but nobody seems to know who it is, and nobody seems to know more about it. So there will be an awful lot more. But there is room. I discovered the other day that the US now has over 1,600 distilleries.
Well, that's a lot. Coleraine is a name from the past, says Frank Hearn. Is there a future to develop the name?
Absolutely. Personally, I mean, this is not good. Let's be honest. This is very poor. It's £16 a bottle, and as I said last week, £10.80 of this is tax. So it kind of gives you an idea of the quality of the stuff in it. But the old Coleraine, the pot still of Coleraine, you can still pick up the odd bottle of it at auction, and it goes for a huge amount of money. It was really ranked as one of the premium brands, but it just disappeared. So there's lots of scope for Coleraine to hark back to their past. Again, this is another one of those. We'll just make it, stick an old label on it, and hopefully people still remember it. Kind of cheap and cheerful. Doesn't do any service, really. There's a huge disservice, actually, to the heritage of the old Coleraine distillery, which, yeah.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up. Michael Matthews saying thanks. Enjoyed the it's his first time here, Michael. I could have sworn I'd seen somebody in a cycle hat before on the lineup. Trevor Watson is saying cheers and thanks. Connor Farrell saying great show tonight, lads. What is it? Dave Cummings is saying, whoa, more whiskey. Yes, very good. And this might be one last.
Keep the beef coming.
All right. Listen, everybody, thanks for the platitudes. There you go. Sean O'Neill, thanks, guys. Another great listen. And James Moira Doherty. The capacity of most of the new distilleries is pretty small in whiskey terms, so there should be room for most hesitate to say all. Yes, there should be room for plenty more. Yes,
there should be. The problem is it's where they're going to get space on a supermarket shelf or wherever it is they're going to sell it. Again, there's now a big switch from white spirits, your vodkas and so on, over to brown spirits. So there's a big push for sort of whiskies and rums. And hopefully, fingers crossed, there's lots and lots of. Just keep drinking whiskey and everything will be all right, So hopefully there's nothing.
All right, fantastic stuff, Marty. Same time, same place next week. We actually know what it is next week, Marty, don't we?
Well, I've had this. I've had a few people say this to me. I had mentioned about women of whiskey, and I'm going to talk a little bit about women's role in whiskey, and just how important they have been, really from the very start, and certainly up until today. Probably a lot more than people maybe realise. So it'll be about women next week.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for watching. Good night and bottoms up.
Take care.